July 15, 1941, Oxford, England, 11:47 p.m. In a locked laboratory at the Clarendon, physicist Franz Simon stared at a piece of metal that would change the course of World War II and the balance of global power for the next century. It was a barrier, nickel powder sintered into a membrane with pores measuring just nanometers across. Invisible to the naked eye, yet precise enough to separate uranium atoms by weight. For 18 months, Simon and his team had worked in secret under the codename Tube Alloys. Tonight, they'd solved the final piece of the puzzle: how to enrich uranium-235 using gaseous diffusion. The atomic bomb, once theoretical, was now inevitable. But here's what almost nobody knows. Britain cracked the atomic bomb problem first, designed the technology, proved it could work, then shared everything with America. 2 years later, the Americans would build the world's largest gaseous diffusion plant using British designs. 4 years after that, they'd cut Britain out entirely, forcing Churchill's scientists to rebuild everything from scratch. This is the story of how Britain solved the impossible problem of uranium enrichment, handed the blueprint to their ally, and then got locked out of their own invention by the McMahon Act, the most brutal betrayal in the history of scientific collaboration. By the end of this video, you'll understand the engineering genius that made the atomic bomb possible and the Cold War politics that rewrote history. Let's rewind to March 1940. The Frisch-Peierls Memorandum, a 7-page document written by 2 refugee physicists at Birmingham University, lands on the desk of British intelligence. Otto Frisch and Rudolf Peierls had done the math that everyone said was impossible. They calculated the critical mass of uranium-235, just 1 to 10 kilograms, not tons, kilograms. A bomb small enough to fit in an aircraft, powerful enough to level a city. Britain's government response was immediate. Within weeks, they formed the Maud Committee, the world's first organized atomic bomb research program. The name came from a misunderstanding. Physicist Niels Bohr had sent a telegram from occupied Denmark mentioning Maud Ray Kent, which British intelligence thought was a code. It wasn't. Maud Ray was Bohr's children's governess living in Kent. But the accidental code name stuck. By July 1941, after 15 months of intensive research, the Maud Committee delivered 2 reports: use of uranium for a bomb, use of uranium as a source of power. The first report was unequivocal. An atomic bomb was feasible, could be built in 2 to 3 years, and would cost approximately £5 million, about $25 million at 1940s exchange rates, equivalent to roughly $500 million today. The report recommended one enrichment method above all others: gaseous diffusion. But here's the problem Britain faced. They were alone. France had fallen. The Soviet Union had just been invaded. America was neutral, and German bombers were hitting British cities every night. Britain didn't have the industrial capacity, the electrical power, or the financial resources to build a gaseous diffusion plant, which would need to be the size of a small city, while simultaneously fighting for survival. So they made a calculated decision: share the research with America, build the bomb together, win the war, and secure the technology for the post-war world. It seemed like a reasonable plan. It would prove to be one of the greatest strategic miscalculations in British history. Before we get to the politics, you need to understand just how brutally difficult gaseous diffusion is. Natural uranium is 99.3% uranium-238, or U-238, and only 0.7% uranium-235. But only U-235 undergoes the chain reaction needed for a bomb. You need to enrich that 0.7% to at least 80% purity, weapons-grade uranium. The challenge? U-235 and U-238 are chemically identical. You can't separate them with chemistry. The only difference is mass, 3 neutrons worth, a difference of just 1.3%. Franz Simon's team at Oxford proposed gaseous diffusion. Convert uranium into uranium hexafluoride, gas, UF6, and then force it through barriers with microscopic pores. Lighter U-235 molecules diffuse slightly faster than heavier U-238 molecules. Sounds simple. It's not. Problem number 1. The separation factor is tiny. Each barrier stage increases U-235 concentration by only 0.4%. To go from 0.7% natural uranium to 80% weapons grade requires passing the gas through thousands of stages in series, a cascade. Franz Simon calculated they'd need at least 2,000 stages for a production facility. Problem number 2, the barrier. The pores had to be small enough to create molecular speed separation, 10 to 25 nanometers, large enough to allow gas flow, uniform across square meters of surface area, chemically resistant to uranium hexafluoride, one of the most corrosive substances known. UF6 reacts with moisture to form hydrofluoric acid, which dissolves most metals. It's highly toxic and attacks organic materials. Simon's team experimented with dozens of materials: sintered nickel powder, electro-deposited nickel, porous ceramics. By mid-1941, they developed a nickel powder barrier sintered at precise temperatures to create controlled porosity. This was the breakthrough. Problem number 3, scale and power. A production plant would require thousands of compressors to push gas through each stage, miles of piping, all leak-proof and corrosion-resistant. Massive electrical power. The eventual U-25 plant consumed 4% of all U.S. electricity in 1945. Precise temperature control. UF6 sublimates at 56 degrees Celsius. Deviations cause clogging. The Maud report estimated a plant capable of producing 1 kilogram of weapons-grade uranium per day, enough for 1 bomb per month. Britain couldn't build it, not while fighting Germany, but America could. In October 1941, the Maud report crossed the Atlantic. Vannevar Bush, director of the U.S. Office of Scientific Research and Development, OSRD, received a complete copy. American scientists had been researching uranium fission since 1939, but without the level of urgency or organization that Britain had achieved. The Maud report changed everything. On December 6, 1941, one day before Pearl Harbor, Bush convened a meeting in Washington to reorganize the American atomic program into the S-1 section of the OSRD. The Maud findings convinced Bush and his advisors that an atomic bomb was not theoretical speculation, it was an engineering problem that could be solved. When Pearl Harbor brought America into the war the next day, the political barriers to a massive atomic program evaporated overnight. In January 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt gave tentative approval for expanded atomic research, and by summer 1942, he authorized what would become the Manhattan Project. On June 18, 1942, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers established the Manhattan Engineer District under Colonel James C. Marshall. Marshall would later be succeeded by Brigadier General Leslie Groves in September 1942, who would lead the project to completion. Here's what Britain contributed. Gaseous diffusion technology. Franz Simon and his Oxford team, including Hungarian physicist Nicholas Curti and German refugee Heinrich Kuhn, shared barrier manufacturing techniques, sintered nickel powder, cascade theory and stage calculations, compressor designs for UF6, temperature and pressure specifications. These designs became the blueprint for K25, the gaseous diffusion plant at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which would become the largest building in the world by floor area when completed in 1945. Critical mass calculations. The Frisch-Piles calculations gave Manhattan Project scientists a target, how much enriched uranium they actually needed. Plutonium path. British physicists also contributed to plutonium research. While gaseous diffusion focused on U-235, the alternative path, breeding plutonium-239 in reactors, became the basis for the Fat Man bomb dropped on Nagasaki. But the relationship was already showing cracks. By late 1942, American military leaders, particularly General Groves, grew concerned about security. Britain was within bombing range of Germany. What if German spies penetrated the British program? What if Britain fell to invasion? In December 1942, Roosevelt restricted information flow to Britain, sharing only what was deemed immediately useful for the war effort. Churchill was furious.
By mid-1943, Britain faced a dilemma. They'd shared everything, then been sidelined. British scientists who'd pioneered atomic research were being excluded from the very project they'd helped start. Churchill demanded a meeting. On August 19, 1943, at the First Quebec Conference, Churchill and Roosevelt signed the Quebec Agreement, officially titled Articles of Agreement Governing Collaboration between the Authorities of the USA and the UK in the matter of tube alloys. On paper, it looked like a partnership. Full collaboration between the US and UK, creation of a combined policy committee to oversee the program, a commitment that neither nation would use atomic weapons without the other's consent, shared access to post-war atomic energy technology. It seemed like Britain had regained equal status. The reality was very different. In December 1943, the British mission arrived in the United States, led by Wallace Akers, head of tube alloys, and physicist James Chadwick, who had discovered the neutron in 1932. The mission eventually included 19 British scientists who worked at Los Alamos and Oak Ridge. But their small numbers belied the significance of their contributions. Klaus Fuchs, a German refugee physicist, worked on gaseous diffusion theory and, unknown to anyone, also spied for the Soviet Union. William Penny became a leading expert on bomb design and blast effects. James Tuck contributed to implosion theory. Yet, despite the Quebec Agreement, British scientists were compartmentalized. They could contribute to specific technical problems, but were excluded from high-level strategic decisions. General Groves made it clear the Manhattan Project was an American operation. Britain was a junior partner. But Britain still believed the partnership would hold after the war. They were wrong.
August 6, 1945, Hiroshima. August 9, 1945, Nagasaki. The atomic bomb, built with British science, American industry, and unimaginable cost, ended the war. Britain expected to share in the fruits of that collaboration. Instead, they got the McMahon Act. On August 1, 1946, President Truman signed the Atomic Energy Act of 1946, commonly called the McMahon Act, after Senator Breen McMahon. The law created the Atomic Energy Commission, AEC, and imposed strict controls on nuclear information. Section 10 was the killer. It shall be unlawful to communicate, transmit, or disclose atomic energy information to any individual or entity. Violations carried penalties of up to $100,000 in fines or 5 years in prison, or both. The McMahon Act explicitly prohibited sharing atomic secrets even with allies. Britain, whose scientists had pioneered the bomb, was now shut out. The Quebec Agreement, signed by Roosevelt and Churchill, was swept aside. America had the bomb, the production facilities, and the industrial capacity. Britain had nothing. The message was clear. In the post-war world, atomic weapons meant power, and America wasn't sharing.
On January 8, 1947, a secret cabinet subcommittee met in London. Prime Minister Clement Attlee and 5 ministers made a historic decision. Britain would build an independent atomic bomb. Foreign Secretary Ernest Bevin reportedly said, "We've got to have this thing over here, whatever it costs. We've got to have the bloody Union Jack flying on top of it." The old tube alloys program was renamed High Explosive Research and placed under Lord Charles Portal at the Ministry of Supply. Physicist William Penny, who had worked on the Manhattan Project, was appointed director. Britain had to rebuild everything from scratch. The plutonium path. Britain chose plutonium over uranium-235 for their first bomb, primarily for speed and cost. 2 wind-scale reactors were constructed in Cumbria to produce plutonium. They became operational in October 1950 and June 1951. A plutonium separation plant at Windscale began operations in February 1952. The gaseous diffusion plant. For the hydrogen bomb program that would follow, Britain still needed highly enriched uranium. In early 1950, the Ministry of Supply selected the Capenhurst site near Chester for a gaseous diffusion plant. The site had been a Royal Ordnance factory during World War II. Construction began in 1950. The plant started up in February 1952 and entered full operational status in 1953, producing highly enriched uranium for British weapons until 1962. Capenhurst used the same gaseous diffusion principles that Franz Simon's team had developed in 1940-1941. Britain had to reinvent and rebuild the very technology they'd shared with America a decade earlier. The cost was staggering. Britain's atomic program consumed approximately £100 million between 1947 and 1952, roughly £3.5 billion, $4.5 billion in today's money, a crushing burden for a nation still recovering from World War II.
October 3, 1952, 9:30 a.m. local time. Montebello Islands, Western Australia. A British plutonium implosion device sat in the cargo hold of HMS Plym, a decommissioned Royal Navy frigate anchored in the lagoon. At exactly 9:30 a.m., the device detonated with a yield of 25 kilotons, matching the Trinity test and exceeding the Nagasaki bomb, 21 kilotons. Operation Hurricane made Britain the world's third nuclear power. The mushroom cloud rose 10,000 feet. HMS Plym vaporized. Thousands of tons of rock, coral, and seawater were blasted into the atmosphere. Prime Minister Winston Churchill, back in office after the 1951 election, was jubilant. Britain had done it independently. 7 years after Hiroshima, 6 years after being shut out by the McMahon Act, 5 years after the decision to build the bomb. The technology that Britain had pioneered and shared had come full circle. The tube alloys story didn't end in 1952. In 1958, the US-UK Mutual Defense Agreement was signed, partially reversing the McMahon Act. Britain and America resumed nuclear cooperation, but on different terms. Britain was no longer an equal partner, but a trusted ally granted limited access. The K-25 gaseous diffusion plant at Oak Ridge, built using British designs, operated until August 27, 1985, producing enriched uranium for both weapons and civilian reactors for 4 decades. Capenhurst transitioned from military to civilian production and eventually pioneered gas centrifuge enrichment technology, a newer, more efficient method. It operates today under Urenco, providing low-enriched uranium for nuclear power plants. But the lessons of tube alloys reverberate today. 1. Scientific collaboration versus national interest. Britain shared breakthrough research expecting post-war partnership. Instead, geopolitical realities, Cold War fears, American dominance overwrote scientific agreements. The Quebec Agreement became worthless paper. Modern parallel. International research collaborations in AI, quantum computing, and biotechnology face similar tensions. When does national security override scientific openness? 2. The price of dependency. By relying on America to build the bomb, Britain lost control of the technology. Rebuilding independently cost billions and delayed their deterrent by years. Modern parallel. Nations today face similar dependencies in semiconductor manufacturing, rare earth minerals, and advanced computing. Losing domestic capability means losing strategic autonomy. 3. First mover disadvantage? Britain pioneered gaseous diffusion, shared it freely, and then watched America reap the benefits. Was generosity a strategic mistake? Modern parallel. Open-source AI models, patent sharing in pandemics, and technology transfer agreements all face this dilemma: collaboration versus competitive advantage. 4. Engineering determines geopolitics. The atomic bomb wasn't won by the nation with the best physics. It was won by the nation with the industrial capacity to build a square-mile gaseous diffusion plant, consuming 4% of national electricity. Britain had the science, America had the factories and power plants. That engineering gap shaped the next 80 years of global power. The story of tube alloys is one of brilliant science, wartime collaboration, and post-war betrayal. Franz Simon and his team at Oxford solved the impossible problem of uranium enrichment in a locked laboratory in 1941. Britain shared that knowledge with America when it mattered most, when defeating Hitler was the only priority. But when the war ended, America kept the bomb and locked Britain out. It took Britain 6 years, billions of pounds, and a plutonium bomb detonated in the Australian outback to regain what they'd given away. The Union Jack did fly over the mushroom cloud at Montebello, but it should never have had to. If you found this story fascinating, hit subscribe. We explore the engineering problems and human decisions that shaped modern warfare, from atomic weapons to encrypted communications to prisoner escapes. Next up, how American code breakers at Bletchley Park broke the unbreakable Enigma machine by exploiting a single engineering flaw in the rotor system. Thanks for watching, and remember, the nation that controls the engineering controls the future.